She is Fatima, is our education developer at the center. May I also add that please do not pester us. I'm using a very strong word for certificates. Certificates take time, and we have noted on the schedule and in the emails that we send you that they will take some time, and but you will get them definitely before uh, end of August, provided your information is correct. Many a times you fill up the form and the form is not filled with the proper email or the proper name or something, and things, we cannot send it and it bounces back. So please fill the information on the Google form that we'll share with you. So welcome everybody. You have seen me every time with the same, start. I'm Ruxana Zia from Center of Learning and Teaching. And Zarek at the background will be taking the questions and pose them to the expert. The purpose of the series is to establish a collaborative community of scholars and peers for learning and sharing. The free part is to provide wider access to national and international scholars. And this fosters knowledge equity, which is demonstrated by our experts who generously give of their time and energy. We have developed this course to synchronize with the researcher development framework. But this framework was reconfigured last year. And so at present of our webinar courses provide a strong coverage of some of the domains like researcher values, behaviors, research methods, ethical and responsible research, scholarly communication and publication, and collaborative research culture. But it offers limited coverage of funding and finance, formal project management, supervision, people management, coaching and mentoring, and research translation and commercialization. This course honors our FCC value of service to the community. There were something like 9,000 unique uh, registrants for these, and everybody, I think, ticked all the sessions. So the total registrations for this webinar were 8,000 and 400 from international campuses and 230 from national campuses across 93 countries of the world. We are very, very delighted to have a colleague, Tahira Haider, who is the head of the Department of Counseling and Psychological Services and adjunct faculty at the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at LUMS. We got to know of her expertise and we reached out, and we are honored to have her with us. She has been a clinical psychologist, an educator, a clinical supervisor, and researcher with over 15 years of experience, where she started her, I think, the career in Australia and then later moved to Pakistan and has been at LUMS. She is the head of the Counseling and Psychological Services. She also teaches undergrad psychology courses. She is also a clinical placement supervisor for master's students in clinical psychology. Uh, at Forman Christian College, I didn't know that, Tahira, that you were already allied with our campus psychology department. Unmute yourself. Please unmute, Tahira. You're not mute. Unmute yourself.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I have actually been since 2021. So the counseling department was set up initially with most of the students, the interns, and the people who were on placement were actually coming from FC. So most of the people actually now in CAPS who were counselors were originally my interns or placement supervisees from FC College. So it's
Oh, wow. We are very happy to know that our clinical psychology is a very strong unit.
it is.
Actually, I was told that LUMS has established its own center, with the support of alumni from the counseling center here, the clinical psychologists here. So we are very happy. So we have a deeper connection, and
We
we'll
do.
never let you go. We'll keep bothering you for future courses. So, Tahira, over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much for the introduction, Roxana. So I'm going to sort of talk about psychology, counsel, researcher well-being, and I'll just share my presentation first before
Please.
we
Yeah.
dive into the content. So, Roxana is generously given the introduction in terms of who I am and what I do. So, good day, everyone. So, it could be morning, afternoon, evening, in different parts of the world, wherever you are. So, thank you for joining from wherever you are in the world. And for the next hour, we are going to talk about something that's very important. So, we focus a lot on, especially as researchers, on the actual research output, but we don't focus much about on the well-being of the researcher. So it's something that's as equally, if not more important. So your output is directly connected to your well-being, and it's not separate from the quality of your scholarship. So before we dwell and dive into the content, I would like you to think of one word that is sort of describing how research has felt for you this month. So it's just a little bit of reflection that you can hold in your mind before we dive into the actual content. So how has research felt for you this month? So yes, if you can write it down and then hold that. So let's look at what we are going to be covering today. The session, the hour, 1 hour or 40 minutes that we have together, 40 minutes of content, and I know we have question time after that, is going to be focused on the key areas of the 4 sections that we're going to be focusing on is why well-being matters. So the psychological foundations that are going to allow researchers to do their best work, not just survive, but truly thrive in the academic space, are going to be directly linked with how you prioritize your health and well-being along with research productivity. So our focus is on the outputs, it's on the publications, it's on getting fundings, but how well are we looking after our well-being in order for us to do all those things. And then stress and burnout, which is the hidden labor, the hidden emotional labor of academic research that goes, behind the scenes, and it can have an adverse effects on us as researchers and on our work as well. And then also looking at the psychological skills. So, practical tools that you can potentially take away from today's session that will help you manage the uncertainty that is very much part and parcel of the work that you're going to, that you do as scholars. There's not a lot of certainty that comes in from the start to the end of the work that you're doing. But how do we manage that? And the perfectionism that comes along with it, and the criticism and the feedback, and when we are submitting our work for peer review and sending it to different journals, how do we handle all of that? And then boundaries in community. So managing workload and protecting not just the relationships around us, the boundaries are there to protect us, primarily us and the relationships around us. So if we have those boundaries in place, and they're not supposed to be considered or perceived something really cold, it's actually there to protect you. And if they are there to protect you, you can make your well-being and your research productivity sustainable over a long period of time. And then just looking how that has an impact on your holistic well-being overall. So let's just start with you first before we get into the content. I want you to take a moment just to consider what has been the biggest challenge to your well-being as a researcher. So just think about some of these challenges that you see on the screen. I think they're not by all means exhaustive, but these are the 6 most common challenges. First one is imposter syndrome. So we tend to doubt whether we truly belong in our field. We've arrived here, but am I really capable? Am I really competent? Am I really worthy? of doing what I'm doing, or is it just something that happened by accident? So this comes up again and again in our journey, in the arc of our career. So the other thing is time pressure. There's going to be a lot of deadlines. There's competing demands. There's never enough hours in the day. And that's something that's constantly there, hanging over us. And then work-life balance. With all the things that we have to do, there's going to be blurred lines between our scholarship and personal life. And do we really end up having a balance in our lives? And then rejection and criticism. So navigating peer review, grant denials, feedback, all of that is going to take a toll on our mental health and well-being. And how do we perceive and how do we, um, when we get that feedback which is negative, do we have, how does that affect our own sense of who we are? Does it affect us in a way that we think our research and our identity are not separate, and we've taken a rejection as a rejection or a failure on ourselves? Have we failed as people? So how are we perceiving all of that? And then isolation. So it's lonely as researchers. The loneliness can accompany deep scholarly work. So what you're doing and the journey that you're on, not everyone around you can relate to that. And some of the challenges are very much your own, and they're going to be a lot of isolation and a lot of loneliness that is going to come along with that. And how are we handling that? And then some of the things that come with all of the above is a very practical thing, which is the funding uncertainty. So job security, grant cycles, career instability. These are all some of the challenges that we as researchers face. So just take 15 seconds, just a few seconds in your mind, and you don't have to say it out loud, and just notice which of these feels most true for you right now. And then we can talk about that later at the end when we have question time. Okay, so whatever you have named in your mind, you are in good company, because research on why this happens is very clear. So why researcher well-being matters? That's the important question. So academic research is obviously one of the most intellectually rewarding pursuits a person can undertake. Most of you, find this personally, professionally, very rewarding. But it's also going to put an immense strain on you emotionally. So the stakes are going to be high. There's going to be few feedback loops, and there's persistent uncertainty that's part and parcel of your work. And that's going to create a unique, challenging psychological landscape that you have to navigate. And the field focuses far too much on the rigor of the methodology. So, we are focused a lot on the analysis, how well are we doing the analysis, how well are we running the study design, how, writing for a journal. But it's going to really equip us psychologically for the conditions that research actually creates. So it creates long timelines, and there's ambiguous feedback, and there's high personal stakes. So, we want to create, or we want to look at how do we make this sustainable, uh, high quality scholarship is how do we make it sustainable? It's not just a technical skill. So psychological resilience, emotional awareness, and self-care practices are actually not something that we consider to be self-indulgence, and they're not luxuries. They're actually going to be the very ingredient and the prerequisite that you are going to require to create that environment that will allow you for you to have research excellence. So psychological skills are what will allow you to stay and will allow you to grow and do your best work over the long arc of your career. So you might have the best skills in the methodology, the analysis, but if the resilience is not there, if you're not able to look after yourself, you're not going to be able to sustain high quality scholarship for a long period of time. So what does that emotional weight actually look like day to day that researchers carry? So let's have a look at it and name it specifically. So the hidden emotional labor of research that most of the researchers are carrying on a day-to-day basis, and most of us don't get to see it, and others don't get to see it, and there's not a lot of acknowledgement for it. Um, it's not because it's rare, because academic culture really makes space for it. So there's not a lot of acknowledgement, there's not a lot of space in the academic arena for the emotional labor that you as researchers are carrying. So the uncertainty and delayed rewards. So research timelines are going to stretch over a long period of time, so years, months, and there's few guarantees. So you are operating without immediate validation, and human beings, we need to know about. We thrive on feedback, the reinforcement, and our confidence and motivation is kind of dependent on how well we are doing. But in this area, there's not a lot you're going to get immediately. So that's going to require profound psychological endurance. So you have to have a very strong, mental ability to be able to go without the external validation. So there has to be a lot of intrinsic validation and intrinsic motivation that's going to drive us. So, but that is the hidden emotional labor, and the rejection and criticism that comes with it. So peer review, grant panels, job markets, they regularly deliver disappointing outcomes. We don't actually get the outcomes we get even after putting in the work. There is no guarantee in terms of acceptance, and there's not a lot of feedback that is going to guide our improvement. And then there's the consistent pressure that people have with regards to grants and publications, and that that's a very I suppose a dynamic space, and that puts an immense pressure on researchers at every career stage. So in the early stages of your career, you might actually need to have publications, and that even after you've done a lot of publications in the latter part of your career, you still need to be continually, able to receive grants, and those grants are going to enable your work to continue. So there's that continuous pressure that doesn't sort of eliminate at any stage. And supervisory challenges, they're also there. So the power dynamics. I mean, sometimes you can have a great relationship with a supervisor, but what if there's misaligned expectations and this mentorship is not sufficient? And it can ultimately compound or add to your stress. And that's particularly, I suppose, prevalent among graduate and early career researchers. So, when you look at this, none of this is personal failing. It's built into how research works. So, long timelines without validation, review processes that reject far more than accept. And for many of you, supervisory relationships where the power balance is uneven, if any of this feels familiar, that's the point of naming it. When these pressures are going to accumulate over time and there's going to be no relief, that can tip into something that's clinically recognizable, and that's burnout. So we want to understand then, we looked at the emotional labor, and if we have these, these challenges for a long period of time, and there's not a lot that is happening to address them, we are going to step into the space of burnout. And burnout has three dimensions. It's not just simple tiredness that, a little bit of sleep can help overcome. It is actually going to affect or erode your capacity to function and find meaning in your work. So, and what does burnout look like? What are the three dimensions of burnout? So there is exhaustion. And this is a profound depletion of your physical and emotional energy. And it's not just going to fix with just a little bit of sleep here and there. It's still going to be there after you wake up still feeling tired. And you're not going to find a lot of joy in the things that you're doing. There's cynicism and disengagement, and that's why, the negative sort of emotions are coming in. It's because we're trying to detach to self-preservation and self-protective response to chronic stress, and people start getting to feel very detached from their own research, from their colleagues, from their institution, And I think that is also a sign when that's starting to happen that we are stepping into burnout. And then that's inadvertently going to affect your efficacy as a researcher. So if you're going to be exhausted and not a lot of rest is going to be helping, and there's a lot of negativity, so there's going to be a diminishing sense of accomplishment and personal competence. So you're not, if there's negative emotions that are there all the time, it's going to have a direct effect on your ability and your capacity to be able to feel good about yourself and then to perform, and have a direct effect on your competence. So diminishing sense of accomplishment and personal competence, even when you're continuing to publish. If you're publishing, you're still having that sense of failure. You're still not feeling good enough. You're still feeling like a failure. And your work is starting to feel meaningless. And eventually it's going to affect your productivity as well. So sustainable productivity is not about working harder. It's about it's about building the conditions under which you can work consistently. And this can happen over a period of time. And well-being should not be considered as a reward that, okay, I've worked hard, now I can just rest. So it is actually the foundation. So I want to underline this line: well-being is the foundation, it's not the reward. And we tend to treat rest as something we've earned after finishing the paper. It has to actually come first. So it's not something we need to consider doing after we've chugging along, working non-stop, and okay, then I will, that's the mindset, then I'll take a little bit of a break. It has to come alongside. You need to continually be replenishing. If you are going to be pouring from an empty cup, ultimately there's nothing left to pour. So if well-being is foundational, what are the actual practical skills that build it? Let's actually go through three. There are actually skills. So managing uncertainty. So uncertainty is not unfortunate feature of research. It is the defining characteristic. So we can't separate uncertainty from the work that we do. Every hypothesis, every study, every grant application that you're going to be doing is going to be involving not knowing what the outcome is. So we don't know what the outcome is, but what we have control over is the process. So researchers, who are going to be waiting for certainty before committing fully, they're going to be waiting perpetually. So the psychological challenge is really learning to act with intention. So we need to work and approach projects with the intention that we're going to do the best we can, and in the absence of guarantees. So there is no guarantee. If you approach something that this is going to achieve this, and there is no certainty in that in that particular project or task or whatever you're doing, then there's going to be a sense of failure that's going to come. But you do your best. You instead of asking yourself, will this work? A question that's more helpful that you can continually to ask yourself is, am I doing this well? So the rigorous process that is actually the truest indicator of scholarly integrity. And it really is the only thing you can actually control. So, there is going to be a fundamental reorientation that we need to have. So we need to shift our attention from outcomes, which are going to be uncertain. We know that in this arena, outcomes are uncertain, to actually the process, which is more within our control. So the process is within our control, not the actual outcome. So we can't really guarantee what's going to be the outcome that is going to look like. So that's really what's really in your control. Instead of asking, will this work, which you cannot answer, ask, am I doing this well? That's the only question you actually control. And it's the only truest marker of scholarly integrity. So I think I'm repeating that so that it really drills down. So I think you can think of, at this point, think of one uncertain outcome you're actually sitting with right now. You could just hold that again in your mind. And uncertainty is just one challenge. How we talk to ourselves when we fall short is actually another. So self-compassion versus perfectionism. So high standards are a defining feature of good research, but there is a critical difference between healthy pursuit of excellence and the psychological trap of perfectionism. So healthy high standards, what do they actually look like? Healthy high standards are you motivate effort, you support growth, you allow for satisfaction when work is done well. Mistakes are treated as information and learning opportunities. So that is something that's a healthy high standard. But perfectionism, it's we want to be perfect, and it underlying perfectionism also sits anxiety. So, and under that, there's a thought under perfectionism that's driving those behaviors is our fear of failure. So and it's going to generate chronic self-criticism. And when we have that self-criticism, what's actually going to happen to us? When we constantly criticize ourselves, we're going to activate our fight, flight, and freeze response. And when we activate a fight, flight, and freeze response, that's not really going to assist us in being able to focus, being able to concentrate, being able to produce our best work. Because at that stage, when your fight, flight, and freeze is activated, and there's a lot of self criticism happening, there's a fear of failure happening, we've activated our emotional center of the brain. And that hijacks the logical part, which is responsible for executive functioning, problem solving, all the stuff that you need to be able to produce good scholarly work. So that is going to make mistakes feel catastrophic rather than instructive. So when you are thinking, catastrophic, that's also underlying that is anxiety. So worst case scenario, we're predicting. And or this is going to have the worst outcome. We've made a mistake, my whole thing is ruined. It's going to have really disastrous consequences. So that's being driven by anxiety. So again, in that negative mindset, our ability to thrive is going to be compromised, because now we've got into fight, flight, freeze response, and we're just surviving. So our survival instinct, our mechanism has been activated. Fight, flight is our survival instinct, and we're just surviving. So the cost to well-being, therefore, is very high. So another way to understand self-compassion is probably how you would respond to a doctoral student if they came to you with a mistake that they'd made or a struggle that they were experiencing. So most researchers, we would respond with patience, we would look at the context, and we would be very encouraging. But we don't extend that same amount of care or that same amount of the language, or but we're very self-critical when we are talking to ourselves, so that language is very harsh. But when we're talking to someone else, we are extending the best understanding, or we're giving them perspective of what's going on. So therefore that same behavior or same language or same sort of attitude that you are extending to someone who might be coming to you externally needs to be directed towards yourself. So self-compassion, again, is not something that's indulgence. It is the psychological foundation of long-term scholarly resilience. So the same amount of compassion we extend to others, we need to be able to offer the same sort of response to ourselves. So even when with self-compassion, criticism and rejection will still follow. So we know if we are still being self-compassionate, we still will face criticism and rejection. So the third skill we need to have is how do we respond in that moment? So some of this is emotional regulation. So criticism and rejection are, inevitable in research. We know that that's something we cannot remove from. And if we are sensitive to criticism and we are sensitive to rejection, that's an opportunity for us to work on some of these things, because this is going to be coming to us even as as really established researchers, or really late in our careers, we still will experience that. So what differentiates thriving scholars is not immunity to these, sorry, not immunity to these responses, but it's actually their ability to respond to them thoughtfully, rather than react impulsively. So it's not that they're immune to these experiences. More experienced researchers, they just are able to respond more thoughtfully than have a knee-jerk reaction. So what can actually happen? So emotional regulation, what actually means, so emotions is something that happen as instinct. If we are sad, upset, angry, that's an instinctive response to something that is in the environment, a trigger, a stress, or whatever. But the behavior that follows after is a choice, which could be how we respond to that, what we say, how we act is actually a choice. So between the emotion and the response is where emotional intelligence sits. And that's kind of the place where emotional regulation comes in. So when we have, say, for instance, there's a maybe some criticism has been given to us. So there's a difficult situation where we feel rejected or criticized. Instead of responding immediately, having an automatic stress response, we need to pause and create space before reacting. Sometimes, we tell our clients, I mean, I've told them to do some breathing exercises, and that is actually going to create that space, just a little bit of pause before you respond. And then actually name and identify and label, okay, what is the emotion that I'm experiencing at this point? Am I feeling dismissed? Is this rather than this is unfair, how could this happen? What is it that I'm feeling at the moment? And that's going to create, when you name and label the emotion, it's actually going to create a distance. And you won't feel very fused with that emotion. And then seek perspective, which means look at the larger context. If you can't actually do that yourself, maybe get a colleague to have a look. So what's actually going on here? Instead of responding to it immediately, look at the wider context, and then choose to respond intentionally. Choose to respond in a way that's in line with your values, not something that you do and then regret afterwards. Choose your next action deliberately. So that's something that you can do. So you pause, you create that space, you name what's going on instead of responding, and you can think about a situation where you can actually apply these. So this particular skill, and then seek perspective. If you can't do it, you can't look at the larger perspective. Instead of, when you respond immediately, you are going to just be responding from the fight, flight, freeze response, which is just I've been attacked, and it is a defensive response. But when you step back and look at the larger perspective, or if you're unable to do that, maybe get someone else, then you are not just responding defensively, you're actually responding in a way that's more intentional, and that's more in line with who you really want to be. So these three skills are things that you can practice on your own. And well-being isn't only just an individual project. It also, depends on the structures around you. So these are things we can control. This is something, self-compassion, emotional regulation. These are some of the things we can do. But let's talk about boundaries as well. What about the structures around us? How can we protect our well-being if, by protecting the structures and ensuring that there are adequate boundaries in place that don't affect or impose unnecessary burden on us. And how do we do that? So boundaries and workload management is something that's very important. There's the always on is like you always have to say yes. It's part of the culture of academia where, if you're not responsive, that's equated with you don't really care about your research as much, and you're not that attached to your research. And if you're resting and not being able to say, draw assertive boundaries or say no, it's equated to being you being idle. It's one of the most pervasive threats to a researcher's well-being. So sustainable scholarship is going to require you to have intentional protection of your finite resources. So every time you say yes, there is a depletion in your resources, in your time, in your energy, and in your attention. So how do you draw some of those boundaries? before you say yes to the next request, run it through these 4 questions. Is this truly urgent? Not everything marked ASAP requires immediate attention. So what can actually wait? So you can schedule non-urgent tasks rather than letting them fragment your deep work time. So the tasks that are non-urgent, just schedule them in and batch them. Batch communication when possible, what can actually wait and what can be delegated. So identify tasks that don't require your specific expertise and build collaborative relationships that you could potentially delegate these tasks to, and therefore your workload can be shared. So, what is truly urgent, not just because it feels urgent. Can it wait and be batched? And can it be delegated? And the hardest one is, can it be declined? So saying no gracefully is a professional skill, and it's very hard. I know sometimes it's harder for us researchers to say that, but it's not a personal failing. So, that's something we need to understand. So saying no is not a personal failing. You're actually protecting your own resources, and you're protecting your boundaries. So it helps to remember why this matters. Every yes is going to have a cost. So every yes requires a no somewhere else. So when you say yes to something, you actually have to say no somewhere else in order to be able to do that task that you've said yes to. So time, energy, and attention are, finite. So each commitment you make is going to draw from the same limited reserve. So, if there's that much you have, and everything you're going to do is going to be drawing from that. So this isn't about doing less, it's about protecting the conditions that are going to make research possible in the first place. And boundaries are stewardship, they're not avoidance. So what boundaries are going to protect is they're going to protect your deep, focused work time. They're going to protect your physical and emotional recovery. They're going to protect your relationships outside of work. And they're going to protect your sense of purpose and identity. And what boundaries are going to enable when you have those boundaries in place is going to be high quality scholarly output. There's going to be, longer and sustainable careers that you potentially can have if you have a good skill of putting boundaries in place. And your ability to, the greater creativity and intellectual risk taking that needs to happen with scholarly work is going to be only in place if you have boundaries. If everyone's making a demand on your time, you don't actually have the capacity to be creative. You're just barely surviving. And then you can be authentic and more present and engaged with your work. So setting boundaries is not a retreat from scholarship. It is actually an act of professional stewardship. So I've written that and I've highlighted. And predicting those conditions can actually make great research possible. So boundaries are going to protect your time, and they're going to protect your energy. So the next protective factor is who you have around you. So connection and community is very, very important for us, in the research area. If you can take one action item from this whole session, consider this. If you can identify one peer, one mentor, or one small group where honesty about struggle feels safe, that's really important. Research is going to consistently show that social connection is going to be your primary buffer against burnout. So isolation is very common, and it's commonly reported in the academic research area, and it's one of the most damaging to our well-being. So research, on resilience has consistently shown, and overall, with other mental health areas as well, it shows that one of the most important protective factors against psychological distress and disorders and all of the different mental health conditions is social connection. It's actually a primary protective factor. So having mentors who can offer perspective, they can potentially open doors. They can normalize the challenges of an academic career through their own lived experiences. Supervisors, when you have a good supervisory relationship, it's functional, it's supportive. It not only just provides intellectual guidance, but it also provides psychological safety for you, where you can take potentially more scholarly risks, and peer support is very important. So, colleagues who are at the same stage in their career as yourself, with the same specific pressures as yourself, with whom honesty about struggle is safe and reciprocal. So you can talk to them and just be authentic and have some level of understanding. And then communities of practice. So research groups, writing circles, scholarly networks that embed you in shared intellectual project. They're larger than any individual study. Then holistic well-being framework. So no single domain, which is physical or social, can carry sustainable career alone. So neglecting one domain is going to undermine the other. So this is not a systems view, not a checklist. So we need to have well-being is basically something that is interdependent. It's not a single fixable variable, like if you're working on your physical health or psychological health, that's good enough. So it's actually not a single domain, it's a dynamic, interconnected system. So we need to have all of these in place in order to say that we are taking care of a well-being and that sustainable scholarship is possible. So we are taking care of a physical health, which is your sleep, your rest. You're taking care of your diet. You're able to regulate yourself. There's self-compassion in the way you are talking to yourself. There's that mindset. Positive. I'm not saying, just be positive all the time, but be compassionate towards yourself, like the way we are to other people. There's strong social connections, there's mentors, there's peers, there's some sort of belonging. And you are professionally, there's growth, there's clarity, there's boundaries, which will enable you to find your work meaningful. So not a single, so you can notice that this isn't a menu where you can pick one thing to fix another. When your physical health is going to drop, your cognitive capacity is going to drop. And when connections are missing in your life, your psychological reserves are going to deplete faster. So the goal is attending to all of these, even if it's imperfectly attending. You don't have to attend to all of them perfectly, but just attending to them rather than perfecting one piece. So just work focusing on physical and then not focusing on the other four aspects is not going to really work. So we need to, even if we are attending to all of them imperfectly, as long as we are looking at all of them, not just one sort of dimension or domain in isolation, is kind of what is important. So with that framework working in mind, I want to close with something concrete you can act on this week. So your personal well-being action plan. So what one small change you can think of that you can make this week that can support both your well-being and your scholarship. So we want to leave today's session thinking about a small change that we can make. So guys, this is a psychoeducation session, so we can't expect to have transformative changes, but research on behavior change has also shown that in order to have change, instead of having ambitious sort of overhauls, if you have small, specific, and immediate actionable steps they're going to far outperform something that you might have, which is big, that you might want to do. So, movement is actually going to create confidence. So if you think, once I get the confidence, then I will start making these changes. When you make that movement and you start making small changes, you're going to actually get the motivation, you're going to actually get the confidence, and it's going to, motivate you to do more. So think of, again, the goal is not dramatic transformation. It is something meaningful, a small meaningful shift that you can actually have, and that you can implement by next Friday, for instance. So what is it? It can be something that doesn't take more than 5 to 15 minutes of your time. Doesn't have to be an hour. So it is something we want to start as something being sustainable. And that can begin at the level of something that is almost too easy. So start with something small that doesn't take too much of your time. It could just be 5 to 15 minutes, and it has to be something that's easy for you to do. Then make it specific. So, something like I will protect, 90 minutes of my deep writing time on Tuesday is more powerful than I will write more. So, how are you going to protect 90 minutes of your writing time on Tuesday? Maybe there's some boundaries you're going to put in place. What are you actually going to do? So, something specific you're going to do, and then connect it to your values. So anchor your action, whatever you're going to do, whatever that is important for you. um, you need to care about that. So whatever action that you do, you have to care about it. It has to resonate with your values. So your scholarship, your intrinsic motivation is going to drive your scholarship, and it's going to sustain that behavior far more reliably than any obligation will ever do. So whatever you do, just remember that it has to resonate with what's really important, what's really more important to you in terms of what your values are. So, I think this is sort of important for us to take away, that we do something that is genuinely valuable in our scholarship, not that something we do just for the sake of it. Okay, so I think we've come to the end of because I'm just looking at the time. We have to have some time for questions. Let's close with any of this that matters, and let's close off the session with some closing thoughts. So again, the goal is not to eliminate stress. The goal is to build our capacity to thrive, adapt, and sustain meaningful scholarly work. So that's kind of where well-being is directly linked. And we want that to remain for the long arc of our career, not just the next deadline. So, what we've sort of explored in today's session is why well-being is foundational to research excellence. We looked at the hidden labor of what researchers carry, and we looked at some practical psychological skills for resilience, looked at some boundaries, and looked at some, I suppose, what holistic well-being looks like, some of the 4 dimensions, and ensuring that we're looking after ourselves in each of those dimensions. So finally, I suppose my sort of closing words would be, and my final invitation would be to treat your well-being with the same rigor and intention that you do when you are looking at your research questions. So the same rigor and the same dedication that we give when we look at our research. So most important, you're not merely a vessel for producing scholarship. You are actually the most important instrument in your research program. So make sure that you are caring for yourself accordingly. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a very, very good session, very clearly articulated. You really put all the cogs in the place and told us how to deal. For me, it was very heartening to learn that with the age, your uh, capacity, the threshold starts going down, and that you have to be mindful. And the other point that I think made sense to me is that it's not about saying that stress is bad, it's about seeing how much you can cope with and understanding your threshold to stress, and then saying no beyond that when you absolutely know that this is. And then that means you have to be very highly self aware. For anything that's well being related, I think your idea about your body, about your social, emotional levels, they really, you need to be very much in tune with everything. And that doesn't happen all of a sudden, it comes with time. You learn what your body reacts to, what your emotions react to, and why. And then when you reflect, I think you start learning more about yourself. Why did I do this? And then sometimes there's a course correction to be done. And I think it's at the end of the day, you have to be a grounded, aware individual, and then the rest of the things will start falling into place as well. So there are some questions that I saw, but by and large, there's a lot of laudatory comments about this session. So, Zarek, I did see some questions, if you could please.
The first question we have is from Dr. Ehsan Farouk, who asks, according to institutional data, there is a dangerous assumption that stress is just part of the job. This belief prevents researchers from seeking help early on and turning manageable performance anxiety into severe burnout or even clinical depression. So, how can a supervisor identify this early and mitigate it in their trainees?
That's a very good question. So,
Yeah.
stress is something absolutely, it's part and parcel of our job. And as Ruxana was saying, we can't eliminate stress, but you can identify, I mean, stress, burnout is something we need to be mindful of. So when we see in our colleagues, in our, not just in the research arena, you can see some sort of detachment starting to happen. I think I was talking about in one of the slides, there was emotional exhaustion. So the person that, if there's a good supervisory relationship, I suppose, and you are, as a supervisor, continue to check in with your supervisees, how they are tracking along in terms of their, emotional space as well. So just even check in, how are you today? How are you tracking along? I normally do this exercise with my own staff, which is just when they come in, where are they at on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10's the highest and 1's the lowest, where are they actually sitting in terms of stress? So it's just a quick check-in. So, and that'll just give them, if they're saying continuously to you, and that'll be an opening conversation, opening liner for a conversation. If they're saying I'm sitting on a 10, you can say, okay, tell me a little bit more. Not that we want to start that as a conversation or as a session, or because, you want them to be directed towards professional help if they really need it. But as emotional support, you probably, as a supervisor, are aware of the journey and the what the trajectory of that journey as a researcher looks like. So that's probably an opportunity for you to mentor and guide them if they're really struggling with something that's tangible and practical. And some of the stress is really also solution focused problem solving. That sometimes people get so stuck in their heads, the problem becomes bigger, and then they lose sight of the actual solution. So when you start an opening conversation like that, where how stressed are you on a scale of 1 to 10, they say a 10, and you can say, tell me what's really stressing, what's so stressful for you at the moment, and they can probably then tell you. And you can see if it's something that's tangible that can be helped, or if something more to do with their own perception of the, like I'm a failure, I'm not doing well enough, or I can't do, there's too much going on, breaking it down. So sometimes it's time management, sometimes all these things come in, and then they can be routed. So their motivation is going to start to drop, and you can see them from their conversation, I can't do this anymore. And even coming in late, someone who's very punctual, someone who shows up all the time for their meetings is now very detached. They're not contributing much to the questions that they previously. So there's a baseline to a behavior, and if someone is acted and behaved a certain way, suddenly that behavior starts to change in their interaction, in their engagement, in the way they're responsive to the emails, and then maybe that's an opportunity there just to sort of reach out and check in, unless they're having meetings on a weekly basis or a monthly, or however that sort of schedule looks like. So I think always check in with your supervisees where they're at, and that gives you sort of a biomarker and a gauge in terms of in terms of their well-being, and that's going to have a direct effect on their scholarship and how they're going to perform and what they're going to do. So I think it's a range of things.
I may
The
add,
next question we
Tahira,
have
I
is
have
from
seen
Dr.
also
Abdullah
in
Kosu,
my
who is a faculty
experience.
member in Foreign Christian College. And a lot of participants had a similar question. So the focus is placed on individual researchers to safeguard their well-being. Why is it not on the institutions and to assume this responsibility despite their central role? And how can institutions create the necessary conditions to ensure the holistic well-being of researchers?
Hmm. I think that's very much a systems question, but well-being, I think overall, I mean, when you are in a institution, if you are actually, there's whichever university you're in, there are obviously counseling centers there. Some in Pakistan, some I'm assuming some universities still maybe even have one counselor, but there's some sort of counselor there. There's some sort of mental health facilities in universities that you can tap in. For people who are, students, they can tap into their counseling services. And I'm thinking for universities who have researchers as their employees, um, based on which part of the world you're in, there could be employment assistance programs that some of the universities do give to their employees, where they can tap into services like psychological support, and they can tap into, their health insurance probably covers it. And when you think you are at that stage when you need to reach out, you can always talk to someone. So well-being, I suppose they to incorporate that in part of the as your own, there's a responsibility we also have to take of our own well-being. So that's there. And universities can take on more, I suppose, education, understanding, and spreading awareness, like what Ruxana and her team are doing. So this is, I think, a step in that direction, that they are giving psychoeducation in terms of why it's important, and that's part of the responsibility universities are taking. So I think this session is a step in that direction, and then the responsibility also sits with the individual as well. And what are we doing to safeguard? Unless there is interpersonal issues that are going to affect the person's well-being, then we reach out and talk. But if there is our own perceptions, our own issues in terms of regulating our emotions and our own thoughts that are in the way, then we need some sort of help with that. And there's nothing wrong reaching out to a therapist or a counselor in your own university if there are facilities, or externally if there is health insurance. And if there's none like that, maybe then having those conversations with the university administration, perhaps that there should be some structures in there that allow for mental health, support, not just for researchers, but for, staff and university personnel overall.
The next question again comes to us from a lot of participants. In today's academic environment, where researchers face increasing pressure to publish, secure funding, teach, and fulfill administrative responsibilities, what personal strategies as well as institutional strategies do you think are the most effective for sustaining long-term scholarly productivity without compromising mental well-being, research quality, work-life balance, and scholarly creativity?
Mm. I think that was part of what my presentation was actually about. So I think there's a lot you can do. There's things you can do on a daily basis, actually, in terms of boundary setting, in terms of looking after yourself. What are you actually doing? Your well-being is you are your, as I was saying earlier, you can't pour from an empty cup. So your physical health comes in, and my sleep, my diet. If you're taking too much, you're stressed, you're going to be consuming coffee. That's going to have effect on your gut. And if you have, if your gut gets affected, that's going to affect what you're eating. And the whole physical, there's a whole effect on your physicality. And then if that's affected, then your ability to function mentally, cognitively, emotionally is going to affect it. So small steps on a daily basis. So you have some rituals in place for you. Getting up in the morning, what are you actually going to do? Maybe a little bit of exercise, maybe some meditation, maybe some grounding. And not everything's going to work. So what might work for you might not work for person X. So everyone has to find their own little toolkit that's going to safeguard and protect their emotional mental space and well-being. So your physical health, your emotional health, your social, and I suppose being able to be assertive and set boundaries in place, and all of the things that we talked about today. So all of that are going to come into play. So maybe as Ruxana said, quite I think quite on the point, is more self-awareness. So I think all of that is going to really drill down to, we really need to get to know ourselves. Once we get to know ourselves, then we can implement some of the strategies that are actually going to be authentic and true to ourselves. So, you might not, exercise might be a thing for you, might actually help you replenish. But sometimes when you're really exhausted and tired, people employ some distractionary tactics for a little bit, and they don't help replenish. They're fine for a bit. We need actually stuff that helps to replenish. And that's what we need in order to stop burnout from happening. So what are those things that are actually really replenish you? Not just give you maybe a small dopamine release for a bit, and then again you're still in that same place. So what are those things? Is it actually connecting with family? Is it meditation? Is it some grounding exercise? Is it exercise? What are those things that are actually really going to replenish your beaker? So if the beaker is empty and we continue pouring out from an empty beaker, we don't. But what are those things that are actually going to fill our cup? That's something we need to identify and really have a look at ourselves in terms of self-awareness, in terms of start monitoring ourselves, and what are the things that are really helpful for me. And sometimes it's difficult for people who are burnt out because they're unable to be assertive, and they're unable to say no, and they can't draw boundaries. So maybe then looking at themselves and seeing, what is it that is stopping me from being assertive? Because I want to be liked, I want to, I suppose, fear of rejection. What is it? So maybe have a look at that. And sometimes if it's really difficult to do that, maybe get someone that you can talk to, maybe a professional even. And also knowing what your values are. So values are really important. They are your life's compass. So, when everything around you is going to sometimes you're going to find it really difficult. But if you know what your values are and you're operating from a place of your values, that's going to allow you to continue to keep going. So, but if we're not aligned with who we really want to be and what we really are, so that's where some of these things become really difficult to navigate. So, getting to know yourself, who you are, what you stand for, what's important for you, and some having those, safety nets in place that don't allow the reserve to be emptied, will allow sustainable long-term scholarship and well-being of the researcher to be intact.
Yeah. Tahira, I have actually learned quite a few things, and I can tell you, self-awareness doesn't come easy and doesn't come early. I mean, you really have to work on it and reflect on everything. There's also a very good ending, I think, in some ways. We should differentiate between being lazy and stressed or burnt out. Psychological exhaustion should not be used as an excuse of not achieving anything in life. And to most people that I come across, when they say this is a lot of stress, and that's a word that has become a sort of a jargon in our everyday life, I have noticed that you tend to shy away from the hard work, and any learning, be it academic or otherwise in your personal life, comes with a lot of pain. And I don't know if there's any other way to learn. It comes with a lot of pain. If the no pain, no gain, that's what I've seen. If you really go into something, discipline yourself, do things, look at the sports people. They cannot sleep after us. They have to sleep early. They cannot date abroad. They can't drink. They have such a lot of disciplinary routines that they have to leave everyday life literally to concentrate on that one skill. And we tend to see that we have to be able to do everything very well. And that doesn't happen. You have to give up some things and you have to decide what you're going to work for and what you will attend to later. I think prioritizing, seeing the difference between important and urgent, there's so many things that we need to learn. So please be patient. Gen Z also has been known to immediately talk about stress, and anything that's not fun becomes a stress. That's what, generally generational divides is showing. Yes, there has to be a space for balance, but I think real life is really very hard. I think in Pakistan, we have a good deal. I have a son in America, and I don't know how he finds times even to exercise. He leaves at 9 in the morning, comes home at 10 in the evening, then he goes for a run at 10. And his family, on weekends, he meets with his family literally. The kids don't see him. And that's the sort of life they live in. And there is a lot of talk about well-being, and that is, I think, if you are rooted in whatever faith you have or whatever belief you have, I think stress becomes easy to manage. And I think in the West, one main problem is their secularism. They do not have that grounding of the faith that holds them to the ground. And now they go to meditation and they go for yoga and all those things. But if you go into faith based practices, they're all meditation and yoga. So
Absolutely.
I think we sort of mix a lot of Western jargon without looking at what the reality in the East is. And the East is very much grounded in reality. I'm taking too much time, but I was reading a research and then found out that countries that are rich actually are the ones who are most troubled. It is countries who do not have so much money are more at peace, and and they are, because they have their faith to hold on to that grounds them. So with that thought, I think I cannot thank you enough. I learned that I must do a check, a barometer check of my staff at the every week. I think that's a great idea, because supervisors tend not to in the flurry of the moment, see who is falling behind. And I think that was a great point, Tahira. And
Thank you.
supervisors should have that sort of talk every week, perhaps with their juniors and colleagues, to see where we are on that scale. And thank you so much.
No,
I
it was
didn't
my
think at
absolute
my
pleasure.
age I had more to learn, but I've learned. Thank you.
It's
Thank you so
always
much.
great. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Roxana.
thank
It's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you, and an honor. Thank
Yes.
you so much. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Yeah.